Aloha and welcome to Piko podcast. I'm Kyle Galdera with Kamehameha Schools Communications, and also welcome to 2021 as we kick off the third season of the podcast. We really appreciate you tuning in. We started this in 2019, so it's hard to believe that we're now in our third calendar year of doing this podcast. And as we mentioned when we started, we continue to showcase the importance of Native Hawaiian innovation, approaches to leadership, and also community building as well. So we really appreciate you tuning in. And no matter how you're catching us today, whether it's on YouTube, watching the video, or listening to our audio version on multiple platforms, the best way to find us is at ksbe.edu in the MUA newsroom, and also on various platforms including Stitcher, Spotify, and as I mentioned before, YouTube as well. You can catch all our latest episodes as well as all the archived episodes there too. And today's episode is a interesting one because as we move into 2021, a lot of folks are dealing with not only changes to jobs and careers, but also different outlooks on the way we work, including remote learning, distance learning, and distance working as well. So with that in mind, I wanted to welcome in today's guest, Tahnee Sales. She's a director of talent acquisition at Kamehameha Schools within the Human Resources Group. And she's joining us today to talk about some of those unique approaches and also career moves in 2021 as we adjust to this new landscape. So mahalo, Tahnee, for joining us.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. Excited to be here.
Yeah, and before we jump into the discussion, tell us a little bit about your background and your work in the HR field and what you enjoy about it and what you're looking forward to here in 2021 and beyond.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you. So a little bit about myself. I am a Big Island girl, born and raised on Hawaii Island, out in Honalo. So anybody from that area, if you know Tashima's restaurant, I'm right in that area. But been here at Kamehameha Schools now for a little over 8 years, hard to believe. But prior to that, spent an additional 10 years actually working in the, I guess, the search firm industry. So providing executive staffing search services for different local organizations here in Hawaii. KS was actually a client of mine back then. So I've got close to, feel like I'm aging myself, but close to 20 years in the field itself, and really have spent my entire career in HR focused solely on recruitment and talent acquisition. So, in terms of, just, maybe what I'm excited about, for 2021, it's continuing to help people really adapt to, like you said, the changing landscape. I've always been really excited and passionate about helping people find what they're passionate about, and helping them find that, right now with KS and previous to that with other organizations. And I think that's actually what drives me to continue in this field. I really love learning about people. About all the uniquenesses of the talents and the skills that are out there, and really what's changing in our world, and how we as people contribute to that, so feel that that's super exciting, and that's kind of what keeps me going in this work. But I appreciate your asking.
Okay. And speaking of learning and adjusting to change and learning new things, what better time than during a worldwide pandemic that we're seeing with
Right.
COVID-19? And with that in mind, what are some of the tips or pieces of advice that you have for folks that are either watching or listening that might be dealing with, having been furloughed or being laid off or even taking voluntary separation if they
Yeah.
wanted to care for a keiki or kupuna even?
Yeah, no, I think this pandemic, has forced us to change, right? A lot of people say at the beginning of the new year, I want to change and I have this desire, but how do I do it? And this pandemic kind of threw us into it. We really had no choice. But to your point, and it's funny that you asked, because I recently did just a kind of a little LinkedIn write-up, because I've been getting that question a lot, like, hey, I'm not working right now. What can I do to make this time productive for myself and to really benefit from it? So few kind of tips that I can throw out there. I've definitely encouraged people to just learn a new skill, and it doesn't mean like go back to school, but there are
Right.
so many resources right through like LinkedIn Learning or YouTube or whatever it might be, right? Look things up and just kind of, learn through that. The other thing, though, that I think, that we're fortunate to do with this virtual means is just reconnecting with people. You might not be able to do it face to face, sitting down in a restaurant or whatever, during Pauhana time, but you can do it virtually. So take advantage of that, reconnect with colleagues and just your own network. Use the time to update your resume. We always say that the best time to actually do that is when you're not pressured trying to apply for a job. So if you have a little bit of downtime, voluntary or not, use that time just to gather your thoughts and put it on paper. And then the other thing that we've been talking a lot about too is like use that time to reflect and absorb in a number of different ways. So, think about maybe things that used to give you spark that maybe you've lost in the hustle and bustle of day to day, like just kind of refine that passion. Don't be afraid to just enjoy and kind of relish in the moments and the present of the here and now, but maybe, while you're doing that, try to establish, I guess, what we call like your own personal brand. Like, what are your values? Who are you? What do you represent? So that whenever you do get ready to re-enter the job market, you're kind of ready for that.
Okay. And that's important. You mentioned that personal brand because that kind of follows you wherever you are and where you want to go. So can you kind of describe that a little more and how do you work to establish or even reestablish that personal brand?
Yeah. The personal branding thing's kind of interesting, and the way I like to articulate it is like, think about a company, right? So every company has their own brand because it's what sets them apart from competition. So I try to use that same spin when you think about like your own personal brand, like what makes you unique, right? What attributes do you have? What values do you bring to an organization that can help set you apart from the competition, right? What makes you stand out? And I think, through those things, you can start to put that on paper. So, think about like, what's your story? What are your goals? What are your, experiences and expertise that may be different from like your day-to-day job, and again elevate that, kind of highlight that about yourself. So I would say that once you do that, then you kind of have this foundation of how to do things like update your resume, because you would want any updates to your resume to reflect that personal brand, right? It's kind of your honing beacon. So but hopefully that kind of gives a little bit of insight as to what we mean when we say, personal brand in today's kind of talent acquisition world.
Okay. And you had mentioned earlier the importance of kind of building and fostering that network. Even though we're
Yeah.
not able to do much of it in person, there's that virtual opportunity too.
Yeah.
And during the career seeking opportunity and the way that you go about that, why is it important to really have that network strong when you go into
Right.
that process?
Yeah, the networking, in my perspective, is beneficial just in so many ways. And like I had touched on, and you did too, it's kind of that right now, it's really this upsell about the benefits of being able to do that remotely. I remember even for myself, when you were invited to network with someone, you've got to take time, account for travel to get someplace, and, leave work early, whatever that might be. But now again, you can just set up a Teams meeting or, a Zoom meeting and just jump on in and engage with people. So I think these virtual get-togethers, even after the pandemic, I don't see any reason why they cannot be the new norm, right, of how we connect, and continue to engage with people. I actually feel like, sorry, side commentary, that I'm probably more connected now with some of my friends because of this virtual environment, because
Okay.
we're scheduling, all of these, little gatherings. So anyway, but, in terms of the connections, a couple of things that I want to point out is, connections can come from so many different avenues. And really, it's the connections, I think, especially in our local landscape here in Hawaii, we always hear that saying, right? It's always who you know, right? How you're connected to people. So you never know how a connection, if you are going through a job change or transition, or wanting to do that, who knows somebody, right, that can give you insights into the market, that can tell you what it's really like to work for a particular company, or even if they don't know, they might know a friend of a cousin that they, just got together with a couple months ago. So, really leveraging that, because again, it can really provide you with a lot of insight and perspective. And the other thing that, we recommend a lot when it comes to connections is don't just leverage the connections that you do have, but ask for connections. If I know that Kyle knows somebody at, another organization that I'm kind of exploring and I have interest in, like, hey, can you, get me connected up with your cousin who works there, or whatever that might be. So don't be afraid to leverage that. And I think, just talk story with people. I think a lot of times we feel like we're bothering folks. But I think, a lot of people will be surprised at how excited and valued actually other people feel when you do reach out to them and say like, hey, can I talk story with you about XYZ, because I think you could have great perspective, or you might know something, so don't shy away from making connections, new, or previously existing. So.
Okay. And the importance of connections, that also goes to the point of, if you're thinking about a prospective employer, it might be a good idea to potentially reach out to that employer before
Yeah.
you even go through the process. So is
Yeah.
that something you would recommend as well?
Absolutely. In fact, I will share that we just had that situation. We had a candidate who reached out to us because they were interested in some of our instructional technology positions here at Kamehameha schools, and saw, I guess, by researching our organization that I worked in talent, and just reached out and said, hey, can I talk story with you? I'd love to learn more about your company, share with you more about my skill set to see if there could be a potential match. So we're going to schedule some time to engage in that conversation, and that happens a lot with my team. And if we're not the ones maybe that can provide that insight, we are always here to help facilitate and make connections even within our organizations, right? See if a manager or another employee from an area would be willing to have those conversations. And the other thing I would say to that is, a lot of folks, I think, also will shy away from accepting a connection or engaging in a conversation because they're like, oh, I don't think that's the right job for me, or I really don't know a whole lot about that company. But I always say, don't turn down an opportunity to talk, because again, you never know what you might learn from that. You never know what they might learn from you. Again, you both might say, oh yeah, that job is probably not going to be for you, but hey, I actually have this other opportunity. Or do you mind if we keep you in mind for other opportunities, right? So again, building your connections, comes from that as well. So I think kind of the bottom line, is just embrace networking. It can be a little uncomfortable. You can feel like, maybe I'm invading people's space or territory, but there's so many benefits that come from it. And I think a lot of people, again, really welcome it, and just enjoy, engaging in that process.
Okay. So we mentioned networking. We talked about updating your resume and building that personal brand.
Oh, I'm
But
so
in
sorry.
addition to, it's all good. We got the four-legged friends joining the
Right?
podcast as well. So in addition to those tactics, what are some other tips and strategies that you can use when you are applying for job opportunities, or even, like you said, just kind of looking around and putting those feelers out?
Yeah. So first of all, I would go back to, if you're looking for a career, like I said, reach out to folks, reach out to those connections, leverage the recruiters, and again, if you are going to do that, if you're going to reach out to someone that you don't know, maybe make mention as to why you're reaching out. Like I said, that particular individual gave me a lot of insights. If you just send a blind connection, you're kind of like, who is this person? What are they kind of after?
Right.
So I would definitely encourage that for sure. But the other thing, is, when you go into these conversations, think about it as your way to again, just learn and gain a lot of information. Again, our company, we like to share information about who we are, right? What our mission is, and that gives you an opportunity to kind of bridge the gap, right? Share where your passions align, and provide a lot of information, that you won't necessarily see on paper. So kind of going back to that, think about your values when we talk about that personal brand, right? And the values, what do you see in the company? How do your values align? And I think really be prepared to kind of answer the question, because we ask it, and we always encourage our managers to ask this. Ask why our organization, right? There are lots of this same type of position all over. So why us? Why our company, right? So make sure, and this I think is kind of common, but very easily overlooked, for people to do their research, do their research on the organization, the department, the division, again, anything in itself that they can take away. In addition to that, use that information when you're updating your resume. We always say, have something, kind of generic per se that has all your experience, but then personalize it, right? So don't only think about the things that are directly applicable, think about the things that could be transferable. I think folks easily can overlook the transferable skills, so think about those things, because I really do see it as I guess the kuleana, if you could say, of the job seeker, right? To really make sure that we as employers know why what do you have to offer, right? Because there's only so much that we can get from paper. So, those are probably some things I would mention. I do want to just mention really quickly kind of the resume aspect of it. Like I said, have a master resume, but make sure that you're highlighting what is applicable to that job that you're applying for, and try to have things be concise, use simple, format, really easy things like that, again, that we see are very easily overlooked. Determine if functional or chronological resumes kind of work for you. Don't add photos, leave that for social media. You'd be surprised how many resumes we get that have pictures on it. Leave that for social media. But I will also say, if your picture on social media, make sure it's professional. It doesn't have to be a professionally taken picture, but professional, if that's what you're going to be using it for. And then the other thing that I'll add, is to kind of to make sure to add in, I guess a lot of folks refer to it as like a summary of qualifications or accomplishments. I kind of like to call it an elevator pitch. Put that information on there to really, again, outside of your day-to-day work, right? What do you bring to the table? Why should I even look past that summary? And I think in a lot of cases, it can help call out the things that you've done that you feel that you've brought value to the organization in, that might even be outside of your day-to-day job. So for me, I lead my resume with accomplishments, because over the handful of years that I've been here at KS, a lot of my big projects and accomplishments are not even directly related to talent acquisition. They've been in bigger kind of enterprise-wide projects, right? So if I just relied on my day-to-day work to highlight my experience, so many things would be missed. So hopefully that helps give a few kind of tips as that you were asking about.
Yeah, that's some good advice there. And you had mentioned earlier that it's actually become a little bit easier to remain connected with some folks because of this, ease of setting up a Teams or a Zoom call, or just using that virtual environment. So how do you apply that to the interview process? Because, a lot of times that whole face-to-face connection is really what can make or break the interview. So how do you approach it when you're going for a career opportunity and you have to do a virtual interview?
Right. So number one, don't let happen what just happened to me, because that's epic fail number one, is having, a bunch of distractions in the background. So, but, and I'm glad that you mentioned kind of the make or break, because one thing that I forgot to add about the resume piece is, a lot of people say that the interview process is your first impression. I actually say that your resume is your first impression, right? That really is the very first time an organization is going to learn or see you per se for the first time. I kind of look at the interview as like the seal the deal. So all of that being said, I would definitely say that all things that typically would apply to an in-person interview should still apply to a virtual interview process. So for example, professional attire, good grooming, kind of making sure that's on point, show up a few minutes early. If you have a Zoom invite, right, log in just, 2 or 3 minutes early, rather than right on time or right after. Because in most, cases, people will have to allow you into the room anyway. But the other things that that we can recommend are find a quiet, kind of well-lit space, again, free from distractions and outside noise. So there was my epic fail. Pick a nice virtual background. So don't have it where people are going to be walking in the background, or that they can see people walking in the background. My background is actually from Google. I love your background, of Maui. But pick something that is a nice virtual background. Again, that won't be distracting. Make sure you have good internet connection, even if that does mean, proposing times to the interviewers that could work better for you, because maybe you have, your keiki who are doing, homeschooling at home, or a spouse that's working from home. You don't want to have everybody on video at the same time because it's going to slow down your bandwidth, right? So just some of those little tidbits. And I would even say, take some time. We encourage people to mock interview, before you go on interviews, but do it virtually with a friend. Make sure again that the setting looks good, everything visually looks okay. And I would again say the same things apply. Make sure you smile, monitor your body language, because we can still see that, right? We can see you slouch or hang over the chair. So be mindful of those things for sure. And the last thing I'll say is, just always remember, that you as a candidate, that you're interviewing the company just as much as the company is interviewing you. So don't be afraid to take a lead in that, a very active lead in that process, right? Ask your own questions, ask clarifying questions, and don't be afraid to articulate your needs and wants, of course, diplomatically, and kind of making sure you have the right people in the room to do it. But definitely bring that forward as well.
Okay. Yeah, and speaking of backgrounds, so for everyone on YouTube, this is a view from up on our beautiful KS Maui campus. And for everyone who's listening, make sure to check out YouTube so you can take a look at it. But yeah, it's always important to have some interesting backgrounds there, especially on these virtual interactions. But as we kind of bring the podcast to a close today, one more question I had for you, Tahnee, was, just for job seekers out there, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of anxiety even. But what are some tips that you have, just some last things for people to keep in mind when they're going through this process amid these uncertain times of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah. So, I know a lot of folks, first of all, we hear that, a lot of folks are afraid to make those transitions. So I do want to just put out a reminder that, job change doesn't have to be outside of your current organization, right? Always remember to look inside, especially if you love the company that you're working with. Leverage, your internal resources and those internal opportunities. But I will also say, because we find this a lot as well when we coach even our own internal staff when they're applying for jobs. Even though you are internal, treat it like an external process. Update your resume as you would for anybody who doesn't know you. Bring your A game to the interview. Don't just assume that because you've worked with folks that you're gonna articulate less about yourself and your expertise, because again, you never know who else they're interviewing, right? So kind of being mindful if you're an internal person, but I want to call that out. The other part, is, again, take the time to focus on your passions, right? You be mindful of how you engage in online platforms. I talk about LinkedIn a lot because LinkedIn is a social media platform specific for professional networking, right? But again, connections, like I was mentioning, a connection you may give to me could come from Facebook, right? And people may then look at my Facebook, so again, just keeping in mind, on how you engage in other social media platforms. I'll also say, don't be afraid to try new things. I know that within kind of the changing structure of a lot of organizations, people are having to do things differently. They're taking on new roles and responsibilities. And sometimes it does make us uncomfortable, because it is very different, but also remember that a lot can come from that, a lot of learning, a lot of growth, right? So if you are afforded an opportunity, again, even if it's not a job change that you're looking for, but your employer says, hey, do you want to work on this project? Accept it. Even if it's scary, accept it, because you never know what kind of skills you may gain from that could help you in the future, right? When you are wanting to make that change. And then a few other things that I think are really great that I've seen, other organizations do in addition to KS. If you're applying for a job, look for companies that have job alerts. We've actually just enabled that functionality here at KS. So what that allows job seekers to do is set up their own alerts that will notify you when the company posts jobs that match the criteria that you've input. So it allows you to kind of stay proactive in your job search. Kind of going back to the networking, some companies allow you to just drop a resume without filling out an application. KS has this thing called Introduce Yourself. Fill out your first name, last name, drop off a resume, it gets sent to the talent team, and they can proactively reach out to you. So again, even if there isn't a job available, but you're really interested in a company that you feel totally aligned with, look for features like that for sure. And then the other thing that, I'll kind of end with, is just, again, take a look at additional resources. A lot of organizations, I think, like KS, we're always trying to help others, and the resources that we want to put out there are not just for the people who are looking for jobs with KS, but just generally speaking. So one thing that we'll be actually highlighting and promoting in February is this Get Ready to Apply page. And it will have tips on how to apply with KS, but what we also want to put out there are additional informational resources that people can just access, some of our favorite links, to different videos or tips on resumes, etc. So I've seen a lot of other organizations doing that as well, so take a look and see if they have other tips, that you could learn from, as you engage in that process. Just again, really kind of keeping that eye out on the different things that are out there. But hopefully that helps. I could go on and on about all kinds of stuff, but I know we've got, a little bit of time left, so I'll try to wrap it up with that.
That was great. And that actually does wrap us up for this episode. And if you're tuning in on various platforms, continue to do that. And as a reminder, you can check us out in the EMUA newsroom at ksbe.edu and also on social media at Kamehameha Schools. And as far as HR is concerned, Tahnee, you can follow up on this too, but the Kamehameha Schools LinkedIn page is a super robust resource for different articles and opportunities and even tips for job seeking folks out there. And just a way to build those connections and help with networking like we talked about today. And Tahnee, any last words before we head out today?
No, that's it. I think for me, I appreciate your reference to the LinkedIn page. I'll also just throw out there, we also have a KS Careers Facebook page as well that we engage in. But would be happy for anybody to reach out if there are any other questions that come out of this podcast. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, and always happy to answer questions. But mahalo nui, Kyle, for your time and for engaging me in this conversation. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been good fun and a great way to start off the new year.
Yep.
So,
absolutely.
Mahalo, Tahnee. For Tahnee, I'm Kyle. Take care. Join us again, and aloha.
Aloha.